The storm had not cleared. It had only learned to speak softly. It spoke in screenlight and whispers. It spoke in the way morning slipped through the blinds, thin and silver, as if someone had filed the sun down to a polite edge. The city woke in silk and static, and Anna, who once measured her days by the hiss of milk and the warm hum of a cafe, found herself measuring by vibrations in her palm. Buzz, buzz, buzz. There were messages with exclamation points, and messages that sounded like prayers. There were old classmates reappearing like ghosts in decent lighting, and a neighbor who had never remembered her name until last night. There were links, always links, each one a question mark that cut. She read some. She did not read most. The television played with its sound gone, and its certainty turned up. The anchor's lips moving with a grace that only comes to those who have practiced saying other people's names. On the screen, rain stitched the windows of Velour Café. A freeze frame caught Anna mid-breath, like a diver about to vanish. Then Adrian, tall as rumor, placed himself between her and the woman in burgundy. Someone had slowed the footage as if to pour meaning into it, as if meaning could be decanted like wine. His voice, in that careful slow motion, felt deeper than it had in real time. "You will not touch her." A headline declared her the center of something she did not know she was near. But centers are just places where lines happen to meet, and lines can be drawn by anyone with a marker and a mood. She muted the world, but not the world's pulse. It lived in her ribs. It lived in the edges of things. Even the light had a new insistence. The apartment she had tended with tidy hands now felt like a jar, and she was the specimen. She should have laughed at the note slid beneath her door. "We'll tell the story fairly. All you need to do is talk." But laughter requires air, and this morning the air belonged to other people. She let the tap run until the sound pretended to be rain. Then she turned it off, because the pretend had begun to sting more than the truth. There are places you go not because they are safe, but because your hands remember them. She dressed in quiet, pulled a cap lum, masked herself with the modesty everyone suddenly craved from her, and stepped into a city that smelled faintly of yesterday's thunder. At the bus stop, her face greeted her from a billboard as if it had made other plans. "Eyes on Anna," it said in a font that thought very highly of itself. Beside her, a man looked twice, once with manners, twice with appetite. She learned something about hunger then. It wears cologne and knows your bus schedule. On the bus, she pressed to the window and watched the neon smear. It was an expensive kind of melancholy, the kind that looks like a music video when seen from the wrong angle. No one spoke to her. No one called her by the name she was used to. But she felt the syllables in the air, light as dust. The whole city was learning her in a language she did not teach them. Outside Velour, cameras grew in clusters. A van unfolded its metal as if planting a flag. The cafe, once a room that forgave, now reflected only lenses. Her manager's message found her, "Don't use the front, come through the back," and she obeyed, not because she was afraid, but because dignity sometimes chooses a different door. Inside, the smell of coffee tried to hold her. It failed. The machine's hiss sounded like a heart learning to run too fast. Her manager pressed a sealed envelope into her hands like a passport to a country no one wants to visit. "Lawyers," he said. "Write, don't speak. Say nothing, not a word. Words are graceful weapons. They cut both ways and look beautiful doing it." She folded her tongue behind her teeth and let her hands be useful where her mouth could not. Grind, tamp, breathe. When the first phone slammed against the glass and a video played her life back to her with a new title, Intimate, she learned a second lesson about hunger. It is very good at choreography. Laughter moved around the room in a practiced ripple, and someone somewhere tweeted the exact right sentence to gather strangers into a choir. At the counter, an older man placed money on the tray and looked at her as if she were simply a person ordering morning from a machine. "One black coffee. I'm not here to film." There are sentences that find you like umbrellas. She poured him something dark enough to remember and watched the steam fog the glass, giving her exactly 3 seconds of mercy. Then the door chimed. Adrian entered with the kind of stillness money teaches a man to bring with him. The room noticed. Phones rose as if saluting. He crossed to his table and sat with his hands folded, and it occurred to her that sometimes a person's posture can be an apology, and sometimes it can be a wall. She did not look. She made rituals of small acts. She told herself to breathe like a civilized animal. A voice cut the room open. The reporter who had bought a cappuccino as an alibi. Adrian, why won't you speak? Or should we ask her? Silence, polite, terrible, fell, and in that exact shape of quiet, she felt herself tilt. Anger can be an instrument, if tuned. Or it can be a fire alarm. She did not think. Her voice rose, velvet with the edge of a ribbon. Why do you keep coming here? Even the machine exhaled. You sit there while the world tears this place apart, while they tear me apart. Do you enjoy it? Watching everyone drown in your shadow? She did not expect him to answer. She expected his silence to do what it did best. Phones leaned forward as if they too had ears. It is a strange thing to feel your own words leave you and become public property halfway across the room. She watched them do it. She watched them change clothes. She watched them take up residence in headlines that arrived before she could swallow. The woman in burgundy did not need to speak. Elegance is its own language. When she finally rose and allowed her heels to announce her, the room bowed without realizing. She did not address Anna at first. She addressed the man who'd chosen stillness as his alibi. You never learn, she said, silk over steel. You think silence will save you. And then she turned and smiled at Anna the way a cat smiles at the idea of a bird. And you, dragged into his shadows, an innocent face for guilty secrets. How long before you realize you're nothing more than a pawn? It takes practice to remain gracious when someone names you small. Anna felt her knees consider the floor. She reached for the counter, the way a swimmer reaches for the side of the pool. She said very softly, no. No one heard her no. Not the crowd, who were busy being a crowd. Not the cameras, who prefer larger words. But she heard it. So did the man in the corner. He stood with the sound of a chair scraping a prayer into the wood, and said enough, in a voice that had been designed for rooms like this. He moved between Anna and Burgundy, shoulders the measure of a door, and when he said, "You will not touch her," he was not merely drawing a line, he was stepping across it. The room exploded, meaning multiplied like confetti, protecting her, guilty with her, together, confirmed. Everyone loves a conclusion that looks good on the screen. Anna's hands were shaking. She let the wood absorb it. She had learned her third lesson by noon. People will offer you a role in their play. If you refuse it, they will cast you anyway. If you accept, they will say you never had a choice. Either way, there is applause. By the time she reached the back room, the little office with the bent file cabinet and the clock that believed in itself more than time, her name was already elsewhere. It trended without her consent. It did interviews she had not given. It accepted and rejected apologies in a seamless loop. Her manager came in with eyes that felt older than yesterday. They're outside again. Dozens. More. I can't tell who's a reporter and who just came to watch. Watching is polite. Watching is violence with good shoes. She sat and the chair made a tired sound. Her phone throbbed where she had left it, a heart that belonged to other people. She wanted to smash it, and also to hold it as if it might change its mind and become a friend. She did neither. She let it live. She let herself live. A knock. 3 times. Not rushed, not shy. I'm not with them, said the man at her door. When she opened it, a careful inch. His leather jacket had seen better rain. His eyes had seen better stories. I'm independent. You should hear what I know. She should have shut the door. She should have taken the flash drive and thrown it in with the coffee grounds and watched it vanish under steam. Instead, she listened to his voice, lower to the register of secrets. Adrian is not just wealth. And the woman in burgundy is not just a color. There are networks, financial, political, quieter than this and far louder. Velour is where they chose to meet, because a story told in porcelain cups travels better than a story told in a boardroom. And you, he looked at her as if pity were a currency, and he was counting, are believable. That word folded itself into her, believable, as if her plainness were a credential, as if a life lived modestly were an alibi someone else can spend. He pushed the device across the small space between them. Documents, names, footage. If you want to understand why they won't let go of you, start here. Truth is an elegant poison. It burns beautifully on the way down. She took the drive and he left her with a warning that sounded like something people say to prove they warned you. Knowing won't make you safe. It will make you visible. Visible. As if she had not already been reborn as glare. Her phone told her she should not have opened the door. Then it told her again. It began to sing a song of photographs taken from the humblest distances. The bus stop, the bend of her elbow at a table, the key turning in the lock. The last message said, "We see everything," and she believed it. Not because it was true, but because fear makes a convincing case. Her laptop flickered in a way it had never flickered, and greeted her face from years she did not remember giving away. She saw the pattern then, like a seam unveiled. The city had been quietly learning her long before the rest of the world arrived with microphones. She was not found, she was curated. The door at her apartment received another knock later, when rain had softened into a suggestion, and the street wore the thin perfume of ozone. She did not open it. She was done with doors. She was doing the math of escape and learning it always comes up short, because every set of keys in a building like hers matches another set of eyes. In the days that followed, the storm traded percussion for strings. The noise remained, but it developed taste. Headlines moved from block capitals to italics. The think pieces put on cologne. People who had never had cause to use the word narrative began to handle it with the affection of a new purchase. A panel of analysts, all very good at leaning in, took turns deciding who she was. Victim, yes, but also vector. Maybe a muse. Possibly a weapon disguised as an ordinary girl. One woman, who smiled like a verdict, said something smooth and surgical about archetypes. Another man compared the clip of Adrian's command to an old film, as if cinema could baptize him. For a moment, Anna had the dizzy thought that if enough tasteful people spoke her into a better story, the better story might catch. But speaking is the richest man in any room. It tips only when it feels like it. At Velour, certain tables learn to angle themselves just so, in case the background of a shot needed character. A pair of teenagers began to live stream their own importance, their whispers carefully loud. A businesswoman staged grief with her eyebrows, sighed about society, and checked if she looked beautiful doing it. The older man with the black coffee continued to arrive and not film. He was becoming a ritual the way sunrise is something you do nothing to deserve and receive anyway. The woman in burgundy became a rumor that dressed itself. She appeared and vanished like a lesson. When she smiled, room temperature rose by half a degree. When she touched her tea, even the teaspoon behaved. She did not push. She did not rant. She knew the luxury of restraint, the devastating grace of suggesting a thing and letting strangers finish it for you. The first time Adrian returned after "You will not touch her," the air leaned toward him without being told. He sat. He folded his hands. If there was a bruise on his calm, it hid well. As she moved in the space he occupied, Anna found herself learning a new geography. How to pass near him without being near him. How not to look and still see. At odd moments, an ache would move through her. The kind that feels like music trying to find a place to belong. It embarrassed her. She would set cups too carefully to punish herself for it. He did not ask her for forgiveness for the life he wore, but there were tiny apologies in how he lifted his glass, in how he refused to let his gaze graze her when the room wanted that hunger. Romance is not always a door flung open. Sometimes it is a seat saved. Sometimes it is the courtesy of not looking, when looking would be a kind of theft. He spoke to no one. The PR aide who had appeared one afternoon, polished, sincere, with a voice that could sell the sea a better blue, hovered near the entrance and did not approach him inside. The aide learned quickly what the room would not forgive: anything that felt like choreography. He contented himself with the outside weather, steering microphones toward less damaging winds. Inside, the cafe became both altar and autopsy. People laid offerings of opinions atop saucers and then cut into them and called it analysis. Anna worked. She worked like a person praying. It is a marvelous thing how one can sanctify a space by refusing to let it become a spectacle. She was not always successful. But there were hours, slender, golden, where a cappuccino was allowed to be a cappuccino, and the thank you thrilled her with its ordinariness. When the flash drive finally yielded to her curiosity, very late one night, after she had washed her face as if faces can be argued into innocence, she found a garden of whispers. Names that do not walk through cafes. Numbers that become other numbers when you look too long. A document that described a meeting that surely never happened in a room that surely does not exist, between people who surely do not call one another by their first names. She read with the terrified tenderness of someone opening boxes in a house that might not be theirs anymore. She learned that velvet is not just fabric, it is a method. How to cloak a thing so that the hand that touches it does not register danger until it is held. She learned that contracts can be conversations, and conversations can be traps. She learned that the woman in burgundy had once been photographed with a man who owned a building where people do certain kinds of math, the kind that moves borders without asking maps for permission. And she learned that her own name had been seen long before it was known, appearing on lists of the harmless. The way a story chooses a narrator is a love affair of convenience. She, apparently, was convenience. The journalist texted only once more. A line without punctuation. Be careful who offers you a version of the truth that flatters you. She did not reply. She has always believed that thank you is a private act first. If love found her in those days, it did so with sedility. It came as a pause between panics, as a glass of water he left near her elbow without making the glass a message. It came as a sentence he did not say, when saying it would have ruined it. Once, when the cafe was so packed with strangers that even the light felt crowded, she caught his reflection in the mirrored espresso machine and found him not watching her. The relief was its own kind of ache. That night, when the city put on its evening jewelry and pretended to be kind, she would walk home using the longer streets. The first time she felt footsteps that were not hers, she told herself it was rain, luring to sound like boots. The second time, a car with its headlights lowered kept pace. By the third, she ducked into an alley and pressed her back to cold brick and waited for her body to remember how to be small again. Someone had taped a piece of newspaper to the opposite wall, with a photo of Adrian from a life that belonged to better haircuts. Across his face, in impatient red, someone had written, "All will be exposed." It was the kind of art teenagers make when they discover the deliciousness of a marker, or the kind that men make when they are afraid of what they admire. She did not cry. Tears have their own cameras. She did what she always does. She returned to where hands can help. She returned to Velour. She mixed sugar in a bowl. She refilled salt. She wiped a clean surface, because sometimes cleanliness is the only language your body trusts. One evening, just before closing, the cafe inhaled a different kind of quiet. The older man ordered his black coffee to go and asked after the weather as if it were guilty. The teenagers had drifted to a new scandal. A woman in a blue coat, no burgundy, just the honest navy of someone who does not want to be noticed, sat alone and turned a spoon in circles, making a small whirlpool of her thoughts. The bell above the door rang a polite goodbye to the day. Adrian stood to leave. He paused, not in hesitation so much as in civility. He touched his cufflink, the way a man touches something that reminds him of a life kept in drawers. And then he turned. He did not step toward her. He did not speak in a voice a room would steal. He simply inclined his head in a gesture old enough to count as a sentence. For the first time since the storm learned her name, she allowed herself to answer a dose of a smile. It did not reach her mouth. It did not have to. It warmed exactly the distance between them, and then was put away carefully, like crystal. Morning behaved again for a while. It poured itself into cups and let itself be sipped. The van outside drove away when someone else did something worse. A podcaster with a moral tone discovered a new sin and made it sound wise. The city, which is expert at anointing and forgetting, did a little of both. People must eat. News must feed. Inside Velour, the choreography simplified. There were days of true coffee, of true silence, of the kind of conversation that ends with laughter, soft as a napkin. Anna found herself breathing to the size of her life again. She wrote shopping lists in a neat hand and looked forward to the smoothing pleasure of crossing things off. She answered texts from friends with emojis chosen with care. She allowed the word tomorrow more room on her tongue. Sometimes the woman in burgundy appeared in the corner of Anna's vision, a coat folding itself over a chair across the street, a reflection, a perfume that suggested roses and strategy. Each time the woman vanished before Anna could decide if she had been there at all. Elegance is often the art of being briefly true. On a late afternoon that deserved a better season, a man in a suit that wanted to be admired took a bar stool and asked for nothing. He placed a small white card on the counter with a name that meant nothing to her and everything to several buildings uptown. "May I?" he began, and before he could say more, Adrian appeared at his shoulder, like coincidence with a memory. "Not here," Adrian said. It was not a threat, it was a temperature. The man gathered his card and his certainty and left the way men leave when they have been told a secret about themselves. Anna did not thank Adrian. He did not ask to be thanked. In the office, the envelope of lawyers grew a cousin. Her manager added a note in his own handwriting, "We're with you." Because kindness still remembers pen and ink. On her break, she read the new pages. There were paragraphs about privacy and paragraphs about patience. Also one about dignity, written in such a way that dignity seemed like a commodity one could borrow against. She closed the folder and wrote a grocery list instead. Dignity, she has found, is easier when you remember to buy bread. That night, the journalist sent a final message. If the story expands, it will try to make you choose. Choose carefully what you refuse. She did not reply. She set her phone face down and chose sleep. Sleep is another word for clean. When pressure returns, it rarely roars. It taps. It asks to be let in. It wears a softer suit. The van came back, but this time the logo was smaller and the camera wore a sweater. The panel shows switched to kinder colors. Interviews were requested with adjectives like thoughtful and nuanced threaded through them, as if you could embroider consent. Even the comment sections learned new words to hurt with: complicated, complicit, context. Inside, strangers performed concern at the counter. They lowered their voices to prove they had souls. "Isn't it awful," they would say, "that people are like this?" while photographing their goodness to make sure it happened. Compassion can be a lens too. It can magnify the person holding it. Anna poured carefully and nodded politely and kept her yeses small. She learned to smile in a way that did not give anything away. She learned to tilt her head in the manner of a woman listening to weather. She learned that sometimes the only thing a person wants from you is a reaction. She gave them excellent coffee instead. Adrian, who had mastered the art of displacement, continued to bring the room a kind of silence that was not empty. He looked the way he always looked, except there was a finesse to his restraint now, a generosity to his distance. She understood then that absence can be kind. He moved only when it moved something for her. He spoke only when speaking might unburden. Once, a young reporter tried to press a question into Anna's palm like a poison wrapped pretty. Adrian stepped forward, and without turning, Anna said, "Drinks only." It felt like placing a crown back where it belonged. There were moments, too, when the world forgot its lines, when laughter happened without permission, when the older man told a story about the first espresso he ever had in a country he could no longer afford. And Adrian listened the way good men listen to things that have no price. When a child dropped a coin and every adult near became briefly humble as they stooped to help retrieve it. When the woman in burgundy, standing across the street, not entering, looked away first. Romance did not announce itself. It arrived the way winter's first cold front does. Unmistakable, refined, clouding the windows in a way that makes the room warmer. It was not a rush. It was a discipline. It was the careful refusal to be unkind to each other. She felt it in the way he placed a bill and did not let it be a show. He felt it in the way she placed a cup and did not let it be a message. Their civility became a bridge. The city, which loves to watch people burn, had to content itself with watching people learn. And yet, because every grace draws its own shadow, the pressure studied their gentleness and took notes. The woman in burgundy's visits lengthened. The card men refined their patience. The journalist's promise of networks made more sense under softer lamps. Threads connected that did not want to be seen. A donor's name surfaced near a foundation that had once paid for a study about digital privacy, the kind that leaves with your reflection. A building downtown sold for less than it was worth to a company whose name changed the next week. An analyst on a midnight show made a joke about capes and coffee shops and was applauded for knowing where the story should live. One late evening, when the sky beyond the cafe wore its bluest blues, and the lamps inside pretended to be gold, Anna stepped outside to take the sort of breath that tastes like something. The street had gone kind for once. Across the way, a violinist had installed longing into the air. She closed her eyes and let the bow tell her what music could be when no one forced it. When she opened them, Adrian stood at a respectful distance, not blocking the view, not asking the moment to be about him. He said nothing. She said nothing. But the music had become a language they both understood. He left first. That is how he said goodnight. She did not notice the new camera at first. It was a better camera than the others. A camera that knew not to be seen. It watched without the tremble of hands that need to hold proof. This camera belonged to money and to patience. Where phones hunt, it harvests. The footage it took would later be edited into something tasteful, with strings that behaved and fonts that understood their place. It would be used to argue that privacy is for people without a story. It would be clicked for a program that sells products to people who think compassion is a brand. It would be slowed at the exact moment her hand brushed the counter near his, and speeded at the exact moment her eyes decided to forgive herself for loving a little. But that was later. Now she returned inside to wipe a clean surface, which had always been her way of telling the world where she began and where it ended. Later that week, the older man brought in a photograph of his own from a wallet that had learned to be thin. He placed it on the counter gently, next to a saucer, the way one places a story on a table and asks it to be fed. It was his wife, young as tomorrow, holding a paper cup on a street in a city that has since outgrown kindness. Beautiful, he said. Not the coffee, her. He smiled as if remembering were a rich sport he still sometimes won. Anna listened the way good rooms do. Adrian, who had chosen a table further than usual that day, let the moment sit without adding himself to it. There is a romance larger than two people. It is called decency. The flash drive remained in her drawer. On the nights when stormlight returned to her windows and the city reminded her of its appetite, she would take it out and feel its weight and put it back again. Truth is a couture dress. It fits only when you've been measured for it. She was not yet ready to wear it in public. Another envelope arrived, thicker, embossed, with a letter that could have been an invitation or a threat depending on your glass. A gala. A fundraiser for a cause that sparkled correctly. Her name appeared near the bottom, as if she had already agreed to be someone else's consequence. She laughed then, softly, because she had learned laughter again. She set the invitation aside and brewed herself a cup reserved for owners of restaurants and souls. The woman in burgundy crossed the street without warning one afternoon and entered Velour, as if doing the room a favor. She ordered quietly. She paid without drama. She stood at the counter in a dress that knew what the word drape means, and waited with her hands lightly resting one on the other. When Anna placed the cup on the saucer, their fingers did not touch. They did not have to. Burgundy's eyes traveled across Anna's face like a collector taking inventory. "You're learning," she said, as if praising a pupil for having mastered silence. Anna's answer was gentle. "So are you." For a breath, the cafe forgot to perform. Then the world returned, and the moment looked like politeness to anyone who hadn't been there. That night, the journalist wrote, "They'll try to launder harm through elegance. Watch for it." She replied for the first time, "I know." If you asked the city, it would say the storm had passed. The city is often wrong about what weather means. It notices thunder and misses humidity. It measures by drama and not by pressure. By now the pressure had refined itself into luxury. It smiled. It offered interviews with good lighting. It invited her to be complex in the ways that make for interesting podcasts. It promised that if she just sat in the right chair and said only the right things, the world would let her be a person again. She declined with thanks. It is possible to be graceful and firm. It is a kind of romance one offers oneself. On a quiet morning that tasted of toast and renewal, a boy came in with a school project about privacy and asked if he could ask her one question. "You just did," she said, and poured him a hot chocolate he had not asked for. He grinned the way boys grin when women are kind to them for no reason. The boy's mother, who had the tired beauty of someone who reads bedtime stories in the light of the refrigerator, mouthed thank you and meant it. Anna felt something in her soften back into its shape. Adrian began visiting at different times. Not avoidance, respect. He had learned to outrun cameras by arriving when they were elsewhere. Money teaches many things. So does restraint. Sometimes he would take his cup to go and leave without the theater of leaving. Once, she found a note beneath a saucer. Not a sentence, just a word. "Breathe." She did. It was the best thing he had ever said to her. The woman in burgundy adapted her choreography too. She mixed absence with presence, the way a master perfumer mixes top notes with bass. She left certain doors open. She closed others with a click that sounded like an opportunity ending. She had begun to move Adrian's world with gestures that looked like patience and felt like leverage. Anna learned to see the shapes of it, not from the front row of a spectacle, but from the humble vantage of a counter where sugar is sweet and hot water behaves. When the next surge came, a set of articles with very fine fonts and research that knew how to smile. It did so with such courtesy that some people mistook it for kindness. They asked if perhaps Anna was more involved than she appeared, but they asked it as if they were helping her. They suggested that complexity might be beauty. They said it was unfair to make her the center of a story, and then insisted on making her the center of a different one. She worked. She wiped the counter. She listened to the violinist outside when life allowed it. She allowed herself to sit at the end of a day and sip what she had made for others. She thought about the flash drive, and about the boy with the project, and about the woman in burgundy who had said "you're learning," and about the way Adrian's head had inclined that night under the softer lamps. She thought about the luxury of refusing a role. She came, ultimately, to a decision that surprised her with its grace. If they wanted a story, she would write the part of it that belonged to her. Not by shouting over the noise, but by speaking her name in a room where names are currency. Not by proving innocence to people who prefer guilt, but by refusing to make a theater of pain. She would not vanish. She would not audition for anyone else's version. She would begin. The next morning, she unlocked the door to Velour and let the early light convert the tables back into places where things taste good. She brewed a pot the way the old man liked it, and she placed a single white sheet of paper near the register with a sentence in a hand steady enough to be believed. "We serve coffee here. We do not serve conclusions." It was not a manifesto, but it understood them. An hour later, Adrian entered with a latitude that felt respectful. He saw the note. He read it the way a man reads a vow that was never offered to him and feels grateful anyway. He looked up and met her eyes long enough to do what a woman had once taught him to do: say thank you without making it a performance. He placed his order quietly and sat where he always sat and folded his hands the way he folds a promise. When the woman in burgundy appeared, as if the city had sent her to test the room's temperature, she found a cafe that had learned how to be itself again. She found a woman who had learned the art of remaining. She found a man who had learned the art of not taking. She found a sheet of paper that understood the difference between nourishment and narrative. She did not smile then. She did not speak. She lifted her cup and tasted something honest. And for the first time in a long time, she put it down empty. The storm watched from the curb and took notes. It would be elegant to say that pressure stayed away after that. It did not. It never does. But it learned in that room to dress better. It learned to wait its turn. It measured itself against a counter that had decided what it was. On evenings when the city chose spectacle again, when phones swarmed and the van unfolded and headlines traded their italic for caps, Anna would find the older man's table and set a cup down with a quiet that scolded the noise. She would see the violinist's bow moving in the glass and know that music once again had the upper hand. She would catch Adrian's reflection not watching her and feel for one luxurious beat, the kind of romance that asks for nothing and gives back the room. There were still knocks. There were still offers with ribbon. There were still notes slid under doors with words like fair and balanced, dressed for dinner. The journalist sent one last message, without punctuation. When you tell it yourself, they cannot steal it from you. She did not answer. She did not have to. She had begun to tell it every day, in cups and in refusals, and in the way she said good morning like a benediction. Once late, when the lamps burned low and velour smelled rich with its own utility, she stood at the window and opened the blinds herself. She did it slowly, deliberately, the way one opens a book. The street looked back and found nothing to feed on. Just a woman in a room with honest light, a counter that glowed because wood remembers kindness, and a life that had chosen to be smaller than a scandal and larger than a headline. Her phone on the shelf breathed once. A single message from a number she had never saved and did not need to breathe. She did, and in that breath the storm had to rename itself again. It tried mercy on for size. It tried patience. It tried romance. It settled for respect. And the city, which prides itself on teaching difficult lessons elegantly, made a small note in the margins of its own book. Sometimes where power and rumor meet, the most dangerous thing in the room is a woman who refuses to disappear. She did not disappear. She arranged cups in their evening order. She turned the sign from open to rest. She walked home by a longer street, because a longer street can be lovely. The rain had learned to fall softly. The screens, oh, the screens glowed, but at a distance that behaved. Somewhere a boy wrote his paper about privacy and asked for more hot chocolate. Somewhere, the woman in burgundy folded a dress into a case and did not look back. Somewhere the journalist clicked a file closed and decided to sleep instead of publish. And somewhere, at a desk with windows that looked out on the city that raises storms like expensive pets, a man loosened his tie and chose not to send a message he had written, because sometimes love is the absence of a demand. Anna, who had been at the center of something she did not name, walked into her quiet and found it ready for her. Morning would learn her name again. On the good days, it would say it the way people say grace. On the bad ones, she would pour a darker roast and remind it. Either way, she belonged to herself. Either way, velour brewed something honest. Either way, the storm learned to sit at a table and wait its turn. And if now and then, a new headline tried on its cologne and practiced its posture for the screen, she would smile like the keeper of an elegant secret and continue with the work of making warm things in a cold world. The center held, not because of the lines drawn to it, but because of the woman who decided a center could be a counter, and a counter could be a kind of love.